Warm greetings. Welcome to Swayam Online Learning Portal. I am Dr. S. Ishwari, Head of the Department of Geography, Madras Christian College. In the previous lecture, we have discussed about the evaporation and condensation. In this lecture, we will be discussing about the cloud formation. So, what are all the contents we are going to discuss in this lecture? That is the composition of clouds, the clouds and water cycle, conditions for cloud formation, importance of clouds, human influence on clouds. So, these are all the contents we are going to discuss in this lecture. First and foremost is what is meant by clouds. The clouds are important part of Earth's weather and climate. So, without clouds, so how the precipitation will happen in the world? So, the clouds plays a vital role, and you all know that the clouds also influence in the terrestrial radiation, and incoming solar radiation are influenced mainly by the clouds. That is, the clouds form when the water condenses in the sky. So, how the clouds are formed? The condensation process is the most important process in the clouds formation. That is, the clouds are invisible accumulation of tiny water droplets or ice crystals in the Earth's atmosphere. So, it's very magical that if it's going to be a water vapor, it is not visible, but if it turns into due to the condensation process, if it turns into clouds, it is a visible process which is happening in the Earth's atmosphere. Formation of clouds. How the clouds are formed? It is mainly caused by adiabatic cooling. So, what is meant by adiabatic cooling? That is the expansion of air and rising in the higher that is altitudes. So, due to the cooling process, it does not affect the nearby surfaces temperature, but the cooling process happens. So, and then because of this cooling process, what happens to the air? It goes to below its dew point. So, the dew point we have discussed earlier also. In this lecture also we will be again discussing about the dew point. So, when it reaches the dew point, the clouds forms. It is also formed at some height above the Earth's surface. That is, it takes a various shapes. The clouds is not a similar shape. So, the shape of the cloud varies based on the different types of clouds. It depending upon the atmospheric conditions. How the shapes varies? It mainly depends upon the atmospheric condition which is prevailing at that particular point of time. The clouds forms when the area of air becomes cooler until the water vapor that condenses to the liquid form. So, in the condensation process, what happens? That is, the water vapor is changing in its form as a liquid form. So, that process will lead to the cloud formation. The water will condense around the dust, ice and sea salt or sea salt. So, these are all the particles which is known as that is aerosols. Water vapor needs some base. So, the base is what? The base is all this nuclei, that is the condensation nucleus, dust, ice and sea salt. So, with that particles, the dust particles, this condensation process occurs. So, this condensation nuclei plays a vital role in the formation of clouds. There are two main factors which determines the types of clouds. What are the two main factors? They are the temperature and wind. The temperature and wind determines the most important factor which determines the formation of clouds. As the clouds are formed at some height over the surface of the earth, they take various shapes. So, the different shapes have been formed when it reaches some height. That is, according to its height, expanse, density, transparency or opaqueness, the clouds are grouped into 4 major types. That is, what are all the major factor which is considered for the formation or types of clouds, or on what basis it is classified. That is, the height is the first one, first factor, and second is expansion, that is expanse. The third one is the density, and fourth one is the transparency or opaqueness. So, this plays an important role in determining the types of clouds. The 4 important cloud types, or the basic cloud types, are cirrus clouds, cumulus clouds, stratus clouds and nimbus clouds. So, this is the family, the major basic family of clouds. So, based on this 4 major family of clouds, the other sub-family clouds will also emerge. So, we will be discussing in the upcoming lectures too in the types of clouds. The composition of clouds. So, the clouds consist of what matters. That is, it is made of tiny water droplets and ice crystals. It may be a water droplets or it may be a ice crystals based on the altitude as well as based on the nature of nuclei, and then based on the temperature and pressure in that particular situation. The ice crystals dominate at high cold altitudes. We know that if we climb up, if there is a higher altitude, what happens? There will be a crystal formation, that is ice crystal formation. It favors the ice crystal formation. The light and fluffy due to the air between the particles. So, imagine a balloon. So, a balloon will be very light. And what is inside the balloon? If we blow the balloon, the air will be inside the balloon. So, the same way this is also consists of the similar characteristics, that is, it is very light and fluffy. What? That is, the nuclei are light and fluffy. It's because of the air particles between these nuclei. It is very small, light droplets remain suspended in the atmosphere. As it is very light, it is suspending in the atmosphere. How the clouds and water cycles are correlated or interlinked with one another. That is, the atmosphere moves water vapor from ocean to land. So, we know this water cycle in the school days, and often we come across this water cycle, that is hydrological cycle. So, the water from the ocean, not only from the ocean but also from other water bodies, and then from the land surfaces, the earth surfaces, it may be a plant or it may be a moist soil which supports this evaporation process. This evaporation and the precipitation is having a connection, that is link. They forms the clouds and cause the rainfall. So, once the air is heated, and what happens? It's reaching to the atmosphere, and due to the condensation process and due to the reaching of a dew point, the cloud is formed. So, it is not stopping with the cloud formation. It's also giving precipitation. The precipitation is received because of the formation of clouds. Remember, that is, all clouds are not producing precipitation. Some type of clouds will produce the precipitation. Hydrological cycle, that is, hydrological balance is maintained because of this water cycle. So, because of this water cycle, there is a loss in the earth surface, the water loss in the earth surface, as well as due to the precipitation. The evaporation is the process which leads to the loss of water in the earth surface, and then in turn precipitation is the process which leads to the gain of water in the earth surface. The conditions for the cloud formation. So, what are all the required conditions in order to form the clouds? That is, the air must contain sufficient moisture. So, without moisture, without humidity, this cloud formation is a question mark. The cooling brings air to its dew point. So once the air is cooled, what happens? It leads to the dew point situation, that is saturation situation, and then the dust and smoke particles, these two most important nuclei, helps the droplets forms. So because of that, the various droplets, water droplets forms in the atmosphere. And then what are all the other triggering factor, that is convection process, orographic uplift, frontal lifting, and cyclonic ascent. So these are all the processes by which the air is lifted and it cools and it forms the cloud. So these are all the particles which is found in the clouds. Then the source of atmospheric moisture. So without moisture or without humidity, there is no cloud formation, there is no condensation processes. So what is the main source of atmospheric moisture? That is the ocean. So in the previous lecture, in the evaporation and condensation, we have discussed the same, that is the ocean plays an important role in the that is atmospheric moisture, because of this vast expense of water sources in the ocean, and it is a major source of moisture through evaporation. So the vast area with the process of evaporation, it gives moisture content to the atmosphere. So this is one of the major source. The next one is the river, lakes, wetland, and the moisture. So along with the ocean water, these factors, that is rivers, lakes, and wetlands, supports the moisture contents. It provides moisture contents to the atmosphere. The soil moisture. So the soil is also not still, it's also contributing to the atmospheric moisture. It releases vapor through evaporation. So plants add moisture by transpiration. So the green plants, because of the leaves, the transpiration processes of the pores, with the help of pores, the water is released, the humidity is released to the atmosphere. So these are all the sources which contribute to the atmospheric moisture. Evaporation, that is, the evaporation is a process of conversion of liquid water to the water vapor. So the water which is present in the land surface is converted into water vapor because of this main factor, that is the sun. So because the influence of sun, which gives the incoming solar radiation to the earth and heats the earth, which leads to the evaporation processes. It absorbs the latent heat from the surrounding. So not only from the sun, which is gaining directly, it also, the surfaces like water and moist air also that is supported to get the that is evaporation processes. The process is driven by the solar energy. The solar energy plays an important role in the evaporation process. It supplies moisture to the atmosphere. So in this way, it supplies moisture to the atmosphere, which is very much supportive for the formation of clouds. Role of transpiration. So that is the plant release. The plant is important here. The plant release water vapor through transpiration. So the transpiration process, which gives in turn what? The humidity to the atmosphere. This process increases the local humidity. Because of this processes, it increases the humidity not only in local area, it also influences the micro level climate also in that particular region. This higher humidity supports the cloud formation and rainfall. So if the process is very high, it leads to the clouds formation as well as the rainfall in that particular region. It is also as important for forest region with a dense vegetation. For luxuriant vegetation, which is most important, that is this transpiration process is most important. Rising of air. In the evaporation process, we have discussed about the rising of air. So, what is that rising of air which leads to evaporation? That is, the warm air is lighter and less dense than the surrounding air. So, we know that the warm air, due to the heating process, it is very light. Due to this very light in nature, it expands, it rises. So, that process occurs here. So, because of this light processes, that is lightness, it rises vertically. So, it is rising vertically, and rising air carries the moisture upward. It is not simply rising, it is carrying along with that what? The air parcels. So, it is also carrying the air parcels to the atmosphere. As it rises, it cools. So, the temperature will be decreasing. So, because of the temperature, lack of temperature, it cools and initiate the condensation process. Once it reaches a certain level, the condensation process happens. So, for condensation process, this rising of air concept is most important. Cooling of air. Not only the rising of air influences the formation of clouds and process of condensation, the cooling of air is most important. That is, the pressure decreases with the height. So, once you climb up in the hill station, if you climb the higher altitude, what happens? The temperature will decrease as well as the pressure will also decreases. So, because of that, the rising air expands. So, the rising air is expanding due to the low pressure. Then the expansion caused the temperature to fall. So, because of that expansion only, we feel cool in the higher altitude hill stations. The cooling continues until the air reaches saturation. Until which stage this cooling process happens? Until it is saturated, until it is fulfilled all the purposes. Adiabatic cooling. What is meant by adiabatic cooling? The adiabatic is a term which is constantly come in the climatology. That is, this adiabatic cooling is nothing but the adiabatic cooling means the cooling without heat exchange. There is no exchange of heat between the nearby surfaces or surrounding region. So, but it cools. That cooling is known as adiabatic cooling. It occurs when air expands during upward movement. If the air is going to expand upward movement, so this cooling process is happening. It is common in cloud formation processes. So, once the cloud to be formed, what is much essential? This adiabatic cooling is most essential. This cooling is essential for condensation process. So, condensation process is occurring because of this adiabatic cooling. Dew point. So, once the saturation happens, then the next one is dew point. That is, the dew point temperature is the temperature of saturation. Okay. So, if we are going to eat, what happens? The stomach is full. So, apart from that, nothing can be intaken. So, it is saturated. So, at that saturation point, what happens? The dew point occurs. The same way. That is, if the air is going to rise and cooling process happens continuously, it attains one stage, that is the freezing stage. At that point, what happens? The dew point started. That dew point which supports what? Condensation begins. The dew point supports condensation. It depends on humidity. How this dew point is, this process occurred. This is mainly because of the humidity process. In meteorology, again and again we discuss about this humidity, condensation, evaporation, and this dew point is also one of the important factor for the formation of the clouds. Next one is condensation process. The condensation, the terms again and again discussed in this lecture because it is the basic process for the formation of clouds. The condensation is the conversion of water vapor to liquid droplets. The water vapor which have been raised in the atmosphere, what happens? It transforms into liquid. So, that process is known as condensation. So during this process, the latent heat is released. The heat is released. Once the heat is released only, that particular molecules, droplets, the nuclei will be cool. The cooling process will start. So it releases the heat, that is latent heat. The droplets combine to form clouds. All these droplets, what happens? All these droplets combine to form clouds. The released heat strengthens the atmospheric uplift and aid further the cloud development. Once the heat is released, what happens? It much more strengthen the uplift of the atmospheric process, and it leads to the cloud formation. The condensation nuclei, that is, the condensation nuclei are tiny dust, smoke, sea salt particles, that is nothing but the pollution or the emissions which is rising from the Earth's surface. So all these dust particles and smokes and sea salts suspended in the atmosphere due to the light weight, they act as the surface for the water droplet to form. So because of that, what happens? The water droplets have been formed in the atmosphere because it is suspended. So that suspension will again supports for the formation of the nuclei, that is condensation nuclei. The essential droplet formation and cloud development, it is most essential. This process, that is the dust, smoke and sea salts, the particulate matters are most important for the cloud formation or development. It influences the cloud properties such as size, density and rainfall potentials. So based on this condensation nuclei, so if it's going to be a smaller particles, the clouds will be very small. If it's going to be a linear formation, the clouds will be frizzy. Based on the condensation nuclei, the size and density of the cloud is formed, and then which leads to the rainfall also. Cloud droplet formations. In the cloud, there are millions of the tiny water particles. So you can see in the picture. So there will be millions of tiny water droplets and ice crystals will be there to form in the atmosphere. So it is suspended due to the light weight and it is carried by air currents. Who is carrying this tiny water droplets? That is the air currents. The air is lifting this tiny particles. The collision and then condensation makes the droplets combine and grow. The collision, so it collide with one another, and because of that the condensation process will also happens, which combine to grow. So the small particle which collide with each other and it grows. So this is the process happening, and the clusters of droplets form clouds and visible as billions of tiny droplets scattering the lights. So how the clouds are visible? Because of the scattering of lights, the clouds are visible. So this cloud droplets formation is one of the important process in the cloud formation. Then ice crystal formation. So the ice crystal, it occurs below the freezing point level. During the condensation processes, we come across this, that is, if it's going to be above the freezing point, what will be the state? The state will be liquid. And if it's going to be below the freezing point, the state will be what? That is, it will be a solid state. So because of this liquid and solid state, this is the below the freezing point level. So that is minus. So what minus? That is, it's less than 0 degree Celsius. So this temperature is a most triggering factor for the ice crystal formation. The water vapor directly deposits as the ice crystals. So what this process is known as, without going into the state of liquid, if the gaseous formation is directly solidifies, that process is known as sublimation. The the ice crystal grow rapidly and it's surrounded by the super cooled droplets. So it plays a crucial role in snowfall formation in the cold clouds. In the cold clouds, for the super cloud formation, this ice crystal formation is most essential. It also enhances the precipitation efficiency as growing ice crystals becoming a heavy and fall as snow. This ice crystal, if it grow further, what happens? Either it will be in the form of snowfall, or if it's going to be that is melt, then it will be in the form of rain. Mechanism of uplift, that is, there is a 4 stages of uplift, that is convection uplift, orographic or topographical uplift, cyclonic uplift, frontal uplift. First one is convectional uplift. In the convectional uplift, what plays an important role? The solar energy plays an important role. That is, the sun warms the earth's surface and heating the above air. That is the air which is above. So because of this heating, what happens? The warm air is rising vertically. So it's rising vertically due to the convection. That is, 2 air masses meeting together because of that heating process, and it rises vertically. So this process is known as the convection uplift process. This process is very strong in which region? That is, in the tropical region is it's most important. Tropical region witnesses this that is convectional uplift cloud formation as well as the rainfall. It leads to afternoon cloud formation and showers. The afternoon is the most important that is duration for which this convection uplift happens and cloud formation happens, and then it leads to precipitation. Next one is the cyclonic uplift, that is the air converge into a low pressure area. If it's going to be cyclone, that is the low pressure is the most important factor, which leads to the formation of large cloud system. So because of this, the large cloud system is formed. That is the cumulonimbus clouds, the vertical clouds are formed because of the cyclonic uplift. Often it's associated with a storm and strong winds. So during the cyclonic period, what happens? The wind will be very strong. The wind will be very strong, and then it also leads to storms. I can cover a wide region causing a widespread rainfall. So it will lead to the rainfall to a wide regions. Then as a warm front clouds, that is, here you can have the warm front advancing cover cold air. So this is the picture which we will be discussing now. That is, the air rises slowly due to the low pressure system. So because of this low pressure system, the air is rising slowly. So as the term is front, that is a warm air as well as the cold air. So this too is the most important factor which requires for this processes. It forms the stratus type of clouds. So in the types of clouds, we have a basic one type, that is what? Among the 4, that is stratus clouds with extensive horizontal spread. So because of this, the stratus clouds, see here you have nimbostratus, altostratus, cirrostratus. So these stratus clouds have been horizontally spreading. So this was the processes of this warm front clouds, which leads to a long duration and steady rainfall. Because of this stretch of clouds, there is a steady rainfall occurs in this region, which results in the large cloud cover over this region. So the spread of this clouds, it's spreading over a large area. Next one is this picture, that is the cold front. So the lift, it is a rapid lift. There is a slow lift in the warm front clouds. Here it is a rapid lift. The air rises quickly. It rises quickly due to the strong convection or frontal activity. So because of these two processes, the air is lifting very fast. So here the cold air and warm air lifting very fast due to the strong convection and frontal activity, which leads to cumulonimbus clouds formation. So this is the cumulonimbus vertical cloud formation, which cause the heavy intense rainfall. So if it's going to be the situation, the rainfall will be very heavy. Often it's accompanied by thunderstorm and lightning processes. What is the importance of cloud? That is, clouds produces precipitation in various forms. The precipitation will be in various forms. That is the rain, snow, sleet or hail. And it also regulates the surface temperature. So the clouds which regulate the surface temperature by reflecting the sunlight and trapping outgoing heat. So in such a way, it is a border between these two processes. It influences the weather system by affecting the atmospheric stability and circulation. It also affects the global climatic patterns by through which process, that is Earth's energy and water cycles. So this energy circulation, the energy circulation and water cycle balance is most important to determine the global climate patterns. It supports the agricultural activity and it also sustains the ecosystem. So in such a way, the clouds plays a dominant or important role in determining the climate or weather of that particular region or global scale. Human influence on clouds. So how the human being is influencing on cloud formation? That is through air pollution, by burning the fossil fuel and by the industrial emissions and by the vehicular emissions. The human being is contributing a lot to this cloud formation. The number of condensation nuclei is generated by human being artificially to the atmosphere. It all alters the cloud droplet size and then the formation of clouds also. It can change the rainfall pattern. The usual pattern will be differing because of this human influences. And then it has a significant impact on local and regional climate. So because of the change in the formation of clouds due to the human impact, there is a change in the impact of the local as well as the regional climate. To sum up with the entire lecture, that is, the clouds are tiny water droplets or ice crystal which is formed when moist air rises, cools and condenses around the nuclei. They influences the weather, the hydrological cycle, and also it helps to regulate the Earth's energy balance and climate. Hope you understand the concept of cloud formation. In the upcoming lecture, we will be discussing about the various types of clouds. Thank you.